And first of all, I want to just show something. Off button, right here. If we could all take 2 seconds and do that with our cell phones, that would be fantastic. Okay, so as was said, I work for the American Friends Service Committee, and I'm just going to take a couple of seconds and introduce the reason why this kind of all got started. I wanted to first say thank you to Dale Bryan and the Peace and Justice. Yeah, absolutely. And also to Massachusetts Peace Action. Whoever's here from Mass Peace Action, volunteers, whatever, just raise your hands real quick. Woo! So thank you to everybody who helped put this event together, and thank you to all of you for coming. If you are in a seat, we made exactly enough copies, so I'm sorry there aren't more. But this right here, save the date, this is for Think Outside the Bomb. Think Outside the Bomb is a Nuclear Age Peace Foundation sponsored conference that is a youth-oriented anti-nuclear conference. For the last 3 years, it's been out on the West Coast, and this year it's moving to the greater Boston area. We have 3 or 4 sites that have given us tentative maybes as being where that we will hold it. So I hesitate to say the exact location. But do look for more information. The website's right on here, and hopefully if you check that out, you can see it's completely youth-planned, youth-run, youth-oriented. Basically, it's for all of you and for us. So if you wish you were part of the 60s and when everything was quote-unquote revolutionary, make it happen again. So check out the website. And without further ado, the last thing I wanted to say before I bring Noam up, because I know that I am not, even though I would like to think I would draw this type of crowd, I know I wouldn't. If somebody can just shout out if you know where this quote comes from. Nuclear weapons are the cornerstone of our foreign policy. Anybody know who said that?
Or was it Abraham Lincoln?
It was Bill Clinton. Oh. So one of the things that I wanted to just quickly do was just kind of break down the ludicrous in that. So nuclear weapons are the cornerstone of our foreign policy. When we think of foreign policy, I don't know about you, but I don't really think about weapons of genocide and mass destruction as what I would like to be considered my foreign policy. So I just want to let that percolate a little bit, that a president would say that the use or threatened use of nuclear weapons define how we run or play with the world. So without further ado, Noam Chomsky needs really no introduction, but I wanted to just say how incredibly thankful I am, and we all are, that he took time out of his incredibly busy schedule to come and speak with us. So let's give Noam a huge, huge round of applause.
Well, if there's a little time, I'll read some of the context of Clinton's statement. I thought the question might come up, so I brought some quotes, but I won't talk about them unless they come up. Can you hear me from where I'm sitting? I should stand over here, right? Is this better? Yeah. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, I'll stay here. The grand old man of American biology, Ernst Mayr, once wrote a rather striking article in which he discussed the adaptive value of higher intelligence. The way he put it was, is it better to be smart or stupid? And he ran through the biological evidence, and it overwhelmingly shows that it's better to be stupid, at least in terms of biological success. Biological success you find with bacteria and beetles and so on, but as you move up the scale of intelligence, it gets much, much worse. He was, of course, interested primarily in humans, left the question open. He did, however, mention that the average life expectancy of a species on Earth has been about 100,000 years, and we're coming to about the 100,000 year mark for Homo sapiens. Well, this question is in recent years is not abstract and academic. It's a very live question. Humans have obviously developed the capacity to destroy life on Earth. Question is, will they use it? And the evidence is not very comforting, even though it hasn't happened yet. The question may well be answered in not too long a time and answered the wrong way. About 25 years ago, I gave some talks, probably one for AFSC, on the title, with the title, The Rationality of Collective Suicide. And what I meant by that was that within the framework of existing institutions and doctrines, there are perfectly rational choices, which in fact happen to be suicidal. And what that entails is that you had better break out of the framework of existing institutions and doctrines, think outside the bomb, as the title of these sessions is called, if you hope to contribute to the outcome that Mayr was afraid might not happen. Well, there's been no shortage of eloquent warnings about this from highly credible sources. Just to mention a couple, the former head of the U.S. Strategic Command, General Lee Butler, about a decade ago, gave a very moving and important address in which he reflected on his life in the military system, moving all the way up to head of the Strategic Command, which is in charge of nuclear weapons and so on. And in retrospect, he says that he had always been dedicated to the prevailing doctrines of deterrence, nuclear deterrence. And in retrospect, he decided that was a terrible error and hoped that others would not fall into it. He says it's miraculous that it didn't lead to the horrendous outcomes that it could have. And he raised a kind of a haunting question. He asked, by what authority do succeeding generations of leaders in the nuclear weapon states usurp the power to dictate the odds of continued life on our planet? Most urgently, why does such breathtaking audacity persist at a moment when we should stand trembling in the face of our folly and united in our commitment to abolish its most deadly manifestations? That was over a decade ago, and to our shame, his questions not only remain unanswered, but have taken on much greater urgency than when he posed them. 40 years before that, Bertrand Russell and Albert Einstein had issued a warning to the people of the world, which saying that you, the people of the world, face a choice that is stark and dreadful and inescapable. Shall we put an end to the human race, or shall mankind renounce war? And of course, they had in mind nuclear weapons. And they weren't exaggerating. If there were an extraterrestrial observer tending to the events on Earth since that warning, they would probably marvel that the species still has survived so long in an era when nuclear weapons were available and came ominously close to being used many times. And these extraterrestrial observers surely would not take lightly the warning of Robert McNamara, former Secretary of Defense, that we are facing apocalypse soon, in his words, if we pursue our present course. It's joined by many other sober and respected analysts. These are not, as I say, academic questions, and that's understood. Well, there are other threats to survival, which Russell and Einstein weren't thinking about half a century ago. The worst of them are the threat of environmental catastrophe, which is very severe. There are many uncertainties about how to cope with it. But one thing we can be pretty confident about, that the longer the delay in taking serious action, the greater will be the cost to coming generations, and it could be a highly lethal cost. In contrast, the threat of nuclear weapons can be overcome, and we know how to overcome it. It's been known for a long time. In fact, overcoming it is a legal obligation for countries with nuclear weapons, namely eliminate them. It was determined by an authoritative world court decision over a decade ago that the requirement in the Non-Proliferation Treaty that the nuclear powers undertake good faith measures to eliminate nuclear weapons is a legal obligation. So it's a criminal act not to undertake those good faith measures. The current administration has renounced them as not applicable to the United States. And in a sense, you could say they're only being honest by doing that because, as you mentioned, that's been the operative policy before. It still is. Well, that's there's a broader question which has come up. About 15 years ago, the General Assembly of the United Nations passed a resolution calling for a ban, calling for what's called a fissile materials cutoff treaty. It's called Fissban for short, because the phrase is too long to pronounce. This would be a treaty which would guarantee that all weapons usable fissile materials be completely in the hands of an international agency. No state would be permitted to produce them, and countries could approach it if they could make a credible case that they're using it only for peaceful purposes. Well, that such a resolution actually came to the United Nations finally. They only advised it in 1993, but it did come to the United Nations in November 2004. There was a call for a description of a verifiable Fissban, and it was voted on in the Disarmament Committee. It's pretty much the whole General Assembly. The vote was 147 to 1, the usual one. There were 2 abstentions. Israel, which is reflexive, have to vote with the United States. And more interestingly, Britain. The British ambassador spoke at the session and said that Britain supported the measure but couldn't vote for this version of it because it was dividing the international community, namely dividing it 147 to 1, where the 1 is the one that counts and Britain has to shine its shoes. So a U.S. vote, negative vote, is in effect a veto. In fact, a double veto, because for one thing, the resolution isn't implemented, but for another, it's vetoed from reporting and vetoed from history. So it's gone. You have to do a research project or, be part of the specialists in the disarmament community or probably be in the AFSC to even know about it. These things are not graven in stone. They can be changed, and they'd better be changed. And in fact, there are concrete steps that can be taken short of reaching a total abolition of nuclear weapons, which is our legal responsibility, and beyond that, short of something like the cutoff treaty, which is more far-reaching. One step that can be taken is the establishment of nuclear weapons-free zones. There are several cases. This is kind of a step-by-step approach to a ban. There are several cases, and they're interesting. One case is the South Pacific. The South Pacific and Asian countries did sign a treaty in 1985, creating a South Pacific nuclear-free weapons zone. That was 1985. It took 20 years before the United States, Britain, and France accepted the treaty, and the United States still hasn't ratified it. The reason was that the 3 nuclear powers wanted to delay the treaty so that France could carry out nuclear tests in the region with the logistic support of Britain and the United States and over the strong objection of the countries of the region. Furthermore, there's a little footnote to the treaty. The federated states of Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands, U.S. colonies, are excluded. So they're not part of the nuclear-free weapon zone, and the reason is that they are they're bases for the United States for nuclear weapons, nuclear submarines, and so on and so forth. So that treaty is partially implemented, but not completely, and the failure reveals the fundamental flaw in all treaty arrangements. Unless it includes the Godfather, it's not going to work, and that's our responsibility. Nobody else can do anything about that. The most egregious violation of a nuclear-free weapon zone treaty has to do with the African nuclear-free weapon zone, which was a treaty was reached by the African countries, but again, there's an exception, and it's a crucial one. The exception is the island of Deigo, Garcia, which is claimed by Mauritius, which is a signer of the treaty. But Britain was a British island. Britain and the United States kicked out the entire population in gross violation of international law, let alone elementary humanity. And it's also been banned by the British courts several times, but the Godfather doesn't pay any attention to that. Kicked out the population so that the United States and Britain could establish a major military base there, which is in fact one of the major bases for the wars that Britain and the United States are carrying out in the Middle East and Central Asia, and is a repository for nuclear weapons for potential future use, maybe against Iran, maybe something else. So again, that treaty is in place, but with critical exceptions. Actually, I just picked up a notice on the way in saying that you can learn more about this on Sunday, April 13th. Maybe you have the same notice. It's given out? Yeah. Okay, so this is a spokesperson for the Chagos refugees. Those are the people who were kicked out of the island and are still living in exile, overruling decisions of the British High Court, let alone international law. But law only works for the powerful if they're forced to accept it, and that pressure can only come from within. It's not going to come from outside, so it's our responsibility. If the treaty isn't enacted, it's our fault, and we're the only ones who can do something about it. The most important case of a nuclear-free weapon zone is still pending. That's the Middle East, and there it's really critical. That could be the flashpoint which will answer Ernst Mayr's question about whether it's better to be smart than stupid. There is a Security Council resolution calling for a nuclear-free weapon zone in the Middle East, namely Resolution 687 in September 1991. And the United States and Britain are, which of course agreed to it, are particularly committed to this resolution. This is one article of the resolution. Now, they're committed to it because that's the resolution that the United States and Britain appealed to as a kind of, to try to find a kind of thin legal cover for their invasion of Iraq. The treaty calls on Iraq to eliminate its weapons of mass destruction. Britain and the United States claimed they hadn't lived up to it, falsely as we know. But that was the legal cover, which means that Britain and the U.S. have a special responsibility to adhere to the call for a nuclear-free weapon zone in the Middle East. That would include Iran, Israel, U.S. forces deployed there, and so on. This is of critical importance. There are opinions about this. Iran, for example, is in favor of it. It's, in fact, Iran's official policy. I think, as far as I know, Iran's the only country for which this is the official policy. Nuclear-free weapon zone throughout the region, including Iran. The American population overwhelmingly are in favor of it. They agree with the population of Iran on this. Most of the rest of the world is too. But there are opponents. The U.S. government opposes it. Both political parties oppose it. The media and commentators oppose it. You can't find a word about it. It's essentially unmentionable. So you can't even say they oppose it because it can't even be discussed. You can check that out by asking how often this resolution, Article 14 of Resolution 687, is even mentioned, let alone the fact that it's Iran's official policy and that maybe 3/4 of Americans support it. Well, again, this double veto. There are further. It's noteworthy that other aspects of American opinion on this issue are also noteworthy. An overwhelming majority of Americans, again around 3/4, believe that Iran has the rights of all countries that signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, that is, the right to produce, to enrich uranium for nuclear energy. Iranians and Americans, again, are in accord about that in public opinion. Both countries have been studied quite carefully by the most prestigious institutions. In reaching this position, Americans actually agree with the overwhelming majority of the people of the world. What's called G77, the former non-aligned countries, actually it's now around over 130 countries, which is the large majority of the population of the world. They have vigorously upheld Iran's right to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes, as is guaranteed by the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which they signed. You read in the press constantly that Iran is defying the world by enriching uranium. And that's true in a certain technical sense of the world. It excludes a large majority of the population of the world. It excludes almost all Americans, but it does include elite groups in the Western countries, in the United States, Britain, and France. So therefore, they are the world, and Iran is defying it. So it's correct to say that it's defying the world. Again, you might see if you can see any comment on this anywhere. It's also interesting this does raise some questions about the relation between public opinion and policy, and it's worth looking into those. You may recall that after the invasion, a couple of months after the invasion of Iraq, after intensive investigations, it was discovered that Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction, so the floor fell out of the official reasons for invading, and that couldn't be allowed to happen, obviously, so George Bush's handlers had him deliver a passionate address to the anniversary of the National Endowment for Democracy, in which he declared that the real reason for invading Iraq was none of this nonsense about weapons of mass destruction or Al-Qaeda, but it was to promote democracy in Iraq, and in fact in the whole Middle East and the whole world, maybe the whole universe, with rather embarrassing, quite embarrassing unanimity and in fact alacrity. Virtually everyone fell into line. I've reviewed it in print if you're interested, but it's pretty intriguing. All of a sudden it turned out, yes, that was the real reason we went in, because our Lord and Master said so, so it's got to be true. Doesn't matter what the facts are. We don't worry about the timing. That's that man standing behind the curtain and the movie I had to see with my children and grandchildren dozens of times. But but everyone fell into line. That's the new party line. There are people who sort of gush with enthusiasm about our nobility, and then there are critics who say maybe we're going too far in our idealism, we ought to be more cautious and pay attention to our own interests, but that the U.S. is dedicated to democracy promotion is sort of comes from Mount Sinai. You can't question it. The 11th commandment. And that's normal when some facts are typically irrelevant, when doctrines of when it becomes necessary to support state doctrine. And this is a case in point. There's something to learn from that, actually. Democracy promotion, we might recall a famous comment of Gandhi's. He was supposedly asked once what he thought about Western civilization, and he's supposed to have said, it might be a good idea. And you could say the same about democracy promotion. It might be a good idea. And a good place to start, as often is the case, is right at home. The gulf, there's a huge gulf between policy and opinion on a host of critical issues. I've given a couple of examples. And democracy promotion might be a good idea here, so that public opinion enters into policy formation in some fashion. Actually, a large majority of Americans agree with this. About 80% of Americans believe that, use the wording of the polls, the government is run by a few special interests looking out for themselves and not for the benefit of the people. That's 80%. About 95% of the public believe that the government should be paying attention, regular attention, to the opinions of the population. But those views are what's called un-American. That was recently formally repeated by the White House. Dana Perino, I think her name is, the White House spokesperson, was asked why the government is so. See, it is un-American. Why the government is so vigorously pursuing the war in Iraq, even though the population is opposed. And she pointed out, accurately, she said, look, you had your input. The American people are permitted an input once every 4 years. And after that, shut up. That's the way our system works. In case you might be misled, this is not the right-wing position. It's also the progressive position. It's across the spectrum. That's the way the system works. In fact, it goes back to the Founding Fathers. Maybe 95% of the population disagree, but what do they have to do with it? That's the way the system works. But we don't have to accept that outcome either. That's also not graven in stone. But the way the system works is every 4 years you're permitted to vote for one of the representatives of the few big interests looking out for themselves, people whose views you object to, and we know that from intensive studies of public opinion, but you're allowed a choice between them, and then shut up. It's whatever happens from then on is none of your business, if that's what we're willing to accept, of course. Well, the current developments are not particularly encouraging, to put it pretty mildly. Bush is now being praised for the alleged shift in the last period of the administration from aggressive militarism towards diplomacy. But that praise is not universal by any means. For example, is his last trip to the Gulf region, where he tried to persuade Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states to join in his campaign against Iran. Here's a comment on it. This is from former ambassador Chaz Freeman, well-known Middle East specialist. He writes after Bush returned that he points out correctly that Arabs are notoriously courteous and welcoming to guests, even when they don't like those guests. Yet when the American president visited and spoke on the subject of Iran, he drew an editorial in Saudi Arabia's major English language newspaper deploring the fact that American policy represents not diplomacy in search of peace, but madness in search of war. That's our closest and most valued ally, the Saudi Arabian tyranny, which sees our diplomacy as not diplomacy in search of peace, but madness in search of war. Again, that's a reaction to Bush's effort to enlist the countries of the region in a campaign against Iran, about which there's a good deal more to say if there's time. The developments in Europe right now are also fraught with danger, and this same meeting on Sunday, April 13th, will address some of the most critical of them, namely the missile defense bases that are being planned for Eastern Europe, Czech Republic. One of the speakers, Jan Tomáš, is one of the leaders of the opposition to this. It'll be a very valuable meeting. And it is dangerous. This is all on the front pages now, the missiles and anti-missile systems in Eastern Europe. There isn't much discussion of the background, but the background's worth keeping in mind. The background goes back to the formal end of the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union. At that time, Mikhail Gorbachev made a pretty remarkable concession. He agreed to permit a unified Germany to join a hostile military alliance, NATO, led by the United States, global superpower. Just anybody who has any familiarity with history knows what a concession this was. Germany alone had practically wiped out Russia with a huge cost several times in the preceding century, and Germany within a hostile military alliance led by the global superpower is far more threatening to Russian security. But he agreed. But there was, however, a quid pro quo. George Bush, #1, who was then president, agreed that NATO would not expand to the east. Okay, so yes, United Germany would join hostile military alliance, but it would not expand to the east, so there'd be some kind of buffer zone. So there'd be some limited kind of security for the Soviet Union. Well, that didn't last very long. As soon as Clinton came in office, he reneged on that agreement. NATO expanded to the east, increasing the threat of war severely for obvious reasons. Clinton also rejected the Russian proposal for a nuclear weapons-free zone from the Arctic to the Baltic, which would have again significantly reduced the threat of maybe even an accidental war, but Clinton rejected that. And the Russians obviously, of course, responded. One part of their response was to withdraw their commitment not against first use of nuclear weapons. Up until the Gorbachev-Bush agreement, they had accepted the NATO position, which is still the NATO position, that we have a right to first use of nuclear weapons, in fact, against non-nuclear states. The Russians also had a first strike commitment. They withdrew it at the time of the Gorbachev-Bush agreement, but they reinstated it after Clinton tore that agreement to shreds, expanded NATO to the east, and rejected the nuclear-free weapons zone, and further hostility developed. It picked up very sharply when Bush #2, when our current Bush #2 came in with the policy of very aggressive militarism, rhetoric, actions, huge offensive military buildup, perfectly predictable reaction. The Russians responded by increasing their own offensive military capacity, and a little bit later the Chinese did too. When you threaten people with destruction, they react. Okay, it's perfectly clear, familiar cycle. What's called missile defense, ballistic missile defense, is a particularly dangerous aspect of this. It sounds nice, defense, but on all sides, everyone agrees that it's not a defensive weapon. It's a first strike weapon. Missile defense is a first strike weapon, and it is understood to be that. The same words are used by Chinese strategists, the RAND, quasi-governmental RAND Corporation, everyone else. If missile defense ever worked technically, what it could do theoretically is prevent a retaliatory strike. It's not going to prevent a first strike. So what it does is eliminate the deterrent of a potential enemy, which gives you a first strike weapon. And that's exactly the way it's described. Furthermore, it's the RAND Corporation, again, the sort of major quasi-governmental advisory research organization, describes missile defense as both a shield and an enabler of action. if we had a system that worked, we would be able to carry out actions, offensive actions, like first nuclear strike against non-nuclear states, which is our commitment. Again, if there's some time, I'll read you some of these things. And the Chinese describe it the same way, and the Russians describe it the same way, and so do U.S. strategic analysts. And if you think it through, yeah, that's what it means. Many critics of the missile defense system argue that it's just not going to work. We're wasting money. Well, let's hope they're right. But the real criticism of it is it might work, or it might even look as though it's going to work, because all of this has to do with perceptions. And if it looks as though it's going to work, potential targets are compelled to undertake measures which will either overcome or evade it, like an increase in terrorism or an increase in offensive military weapons and so on, which is exactly what's happening. As Bush pressed for the missile defense system in Eastern Europe, Czech Republic and Poland, is particularly threatening to Russia for reasons that you can read about from leading U.S. strategic analysts. George Lewis and Ted Postol had an article about it in Arms Control Today a couple of months ago, sort of most, the major arms control journal, in which they simply ran through the reasons why Russian analysts must assume that this system placed in Poland and the Czech Republic is a threat to their deterrent, and not in the form that it's taking today, but in the form to which it will expand from this basis. I mean, if Russia was placing such systems in Canada and Mexico, we'd have a nuclear war tomorrow. There wouldn't be any discussion about it. But they're not doing that, but they are recognizing a threat. The threat is even more obvious when Bush's advisors rejected Putin's proposal to move the system to the south. In theory, it's supposed to be a defense against Iran. Come back to that in a minute. But Putin said, okay, if it's defense against Iran, then place the system somewhere where it can detect Iranian missiles, not in Poland. Nothing to do with Iranian missiles. So he's offered a place in Azerbaijan, another one in Georgia. The U.S. could do it in eastern Turkey, which basically owns major military bases. But that's no good. The U.S. wants it in a place where it threatens the Russian deterrent, which is exactly what it does. And Russia has reacted exactly as predicted. This is described here as aggressive and, bringing back the Cold War. And, it is all of those things, but it's also predictable. The Russians have substantially increased their offensive military capacity with devastating new submarine-launched intercontinental nuclear weapons, which would overcome any imaginable defensive system. They've withdrawn or threatening to withdraw from the European Conventional Forces Treaty, which is a peacemaking gesture in Europe to reduce conventional forces. And Putin's simply warned Poland and Czechoslovakia that they're going to, the Czech Republic, that they will be aiming nuclear missiles at those countries if they participate in this system. Well, all of that is completely predictable. Beyond this, should also be mentioned, it is again understood by everyone that ballistic missile defense is just a shorthand for militarization of space. It's a step towards militarization of space. And if that takes place, we can kiss the human species goodbye. The chances of survival are slim enough the way the systems have developed in the past years, but this sort of puts an end to it. Chance of survival is very slight. And the world knows it. There has been overwhelming opposition to militarization of space. The United States stands alone. Israel, Palau occasionally or something, but essentially alone in opposing efforts to reserve space for non-military uses. It was bad enough under Clinton. Under Clinton, the U.S. also stood alone in blocking this. Clinton's position was that the U.S. should attain what he called control over space for military purposes. The Bush administration upped that from control over space to ownership of space for military purposes, and those are not words. They're proceeding with vast amounts of expenditure to achieve that goal. Just a couple of weeks ago, the U.S. again voted alone against a draft treaty banning weapons in space and anti-satellite weapons. All of this just moves the doomsday clock closer towards midnight, famous doomsday clock. Very little of this ever gets reported, but it's happening. And you better pay attention to it if you hope to survive or have your children survive. Well, let me return to the questions. I began with General Butler's question. By what authority do succeeding generations of leaders in the nuclear weapon states, by what authority do they usurp the power to dictate the odds of continued life on our planet? And there's an answer to that question. They usurp the power because we grant it to them. There's no other basis for the power. We grant them that power, yes, they'll use it. And they'll use it in ways which are predictable and understandable. They are rational choices within an insane system, an insane framework, which will lead to collective suicide. But that's our choice. Our choice is the one that Russell and Einstein presented to us half a century ago, the stark and dreadful and inescapable choice. Shall we put an end to the human race, or shall we completely dismantle and abandon this insane framework of decision-making? I'll stop there.
So first of all, thank you again to Professor Chomsky. I know a lot of those ideas are kind of heady and up here, but hopefully we're all taking notes, and many of those things are easily found on the internet. And just one more plug for Think Outside the Bomb. It brings it all down into kind of minute bites that you can handle. We're going to take questions now for Professor Chomsky. So what we're actually going to do is, because the handheld mics aren't working, we're going to ask people that have questions. We're going to give you about 2 minutes to line up here, and then we're going to take questions up here. So anybody that has a question they'd like to ask, if you could just take a couple minutes and line up over here.
Why not put the question or just use this mic? Because then everybody will hear them.
We're just going to have them line up, and then we're going to post them over and and these are what Noam was talking about. It's a no basis speaking tour that's going on. Jan Tomas of Czech Republic and Olivier Bancu of Deigo Garcia are both going to be speaking at the Friends Meeting House in Cambridge on Sunday. So if you're interested in learning more about U.S. empire and ways that people are trying to resist that, then definitely grab one of these. And we're just going to take a minute. Sure. Is there like 1 or 2 volunteers that wouldn't mind passing these out as we're doing this? Cool, thanks. All right.
Look at the crowd tonight. It's at least half women or a majority women. Now that's very unusual for a Noam Chomsky crowd. So I'm going to ask this question. Is peace and justice a gender issue? And I base that upon my own personal opinions too, because I found that myself and other men tend to think more of violence, tend to think more of changing things through violence, and it seems to me that women tend to think of changing things without violence.
Well, probably some truth to that. In fact, there's evidence for it. But if so, we can only hope that feminism, the feminist revolution extends. If not, we'll be given the wrong answer to Ernst Mayr's question.
Sure.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I don't have that kind of voice. So my question would be, Professor Chomsky, a lot of people who support the idea of anti-missile defense in Europe, they say it wouldn't stop Russian missiles actually. Well, if you look at the map, the way we usually look at it, Poland and the Czech Republic are situated between the States and Russia. But in fact, Russian missiles are said to be targeted at the United States through the North Pole. So for this reason, a lot of military experts say that these military bases, the bases in the Czech Republic and Poland, would in fact only be able to stop Iranian missiles, not Russian. And for this reason, Russia has, nothing to worry about actually. What can you reply to this?
Well, if I'll come back to the Iranian part, but the fact is that early warning systems in the Czech Republic and anti-missile systems in northern Poland do in fact threaten the Russian deterrent. And if you want details on it, just take a look at the article I cited to you. The George Lewis, Theodore Ted Postol article in the couple of issues back in Arms Control Today. They run through it in detail. And they explain why any Russian strategic analyst would have to conclude this. Just as I say, if the Russians were putting anti-missile bases in, say, Western Canada, which is not on the path of missiles to Moscow, to Washington, we wouldn't accept it. We'd wipe them out. We wouldn't even talk about it. We'd wipe them out. Now, what about the idea that the missiles are directed against Iran? Almost nobody takes that seriously, except really people deeply embedded in U.S. doctrine. First of all, if the missiles were directed against, if the anti-missile systems were directed against Iran, as Putin said, they'd put them in eastern Turkey, Azerbaijan, and so on. So why put them up north? That's not going to detect Iranian missiles. Secondly, if anybody's concerned about missiles from Iran, there's a very easy way to deal with it. Accept the position of the large majority of Americans, the official Iranian position, and the position of most of the world, and the position that the U.S. and Britain are officially committed to, namely establish a nuclear-free weapon zone in the Middle East. Okay, end of story. Since that question can't even be discussed, we know that there's no concern about missiles from Iran because the obvious way to deal with it can't be discussed. Incidentally, Israel, and of course the reason is that a U.S. client state is the dominant military power in the region, nuclear power, namely Israel. Do the Israeli nuclear weapons in any way defend Israel? Well, I won't go through that in detail, but if you're interested in the discussion of it, this happens to be a very good one in print by one of Israel's leading strategic analysts, Ze'ev Maoz. It's in English. It's a book called Defending the Holy Land, and kind of like a massive 800-page book in which he runs through Israel's strategic doctrines since its founding. Pretty critically, even though he's right on the inside of the establishment. As far as the nuclear weapons are concerned, he argues that they have harmed Israel's security and will continue to. He gives a detailed examination of this. Incidentally, there's a comparable, we don't hear much about what goes on in Iran, but a lot does go on in Iran. In fact, one leading Iranian scholar, American Iranian scholar, Ervand, Abrahamian, has pointed out the interesting fact that Iran seems to be the only country now, or in fact in history, where the decision as to whether to develop nuclear weapons has even been discussed, publicly that is. No other country has it ever been discussed. It's always done in secret. I mean, maybe the secret's kind of easily penetrable like the Israeli case, but at least it's secret. Iran is publicly discussed, and he quotes high Iranian officials, like defense ministers and so on, who give arguments rather like Ze'ev Maoz's, saying that it would be harmful to Iranian security to move in that direction if they ever think about it. So I think there's a basis in the countries of the region for at least a discussion and maybe actions to implement the nuclear-free weapon zone. And if it's done, that's the end of the story about Iranian missiles and weapons, even if there are any. And as far as we know, there aren't any. I might say that the national intelligence estimate, famous one that came out last December, is saying that they stopped their work on nuclear weapons in 2003, didn't say that they had been working on nuclear weapons prior to 2003. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but nothing was said, so we don't know. Maybe the arguments that Abrahamian reviews actually prevailed. The final reason for not taking seriously this threat is that, let's imagine that Iran had missiles capable of reaching Europe or the United States and had thermonuclear weapons, the most advanced you like. Could they use them? Well, only if they were dedicated to self-vaporization. I mean, if one missile went off, end of Iran, there's no conceivable way in which they could use them. I mean, if Europe is worried about the Iranian threat, they ought to, if they're rational, what they ought to be doing is building an asteroid defense system. Because the chance of being hit by an asteroid is probably much higher than the chance of being hit by an Iranian missile. If you just think it through. So it's extremely hard to take this seriously from many points of view. So what's it all about? Well, what it's all about is exactly what a missile defense system is. It's a first strike weapon. So it's a first strike weapon against Iran. It's saying even if you develop a deterrent, it's not going to work. So therefore we have to be free to attack you, because we are the lords of the earth, and we have to be free to attack you without any hope of your responding. You've got to understand that. That's what the missile defense system is, if it's anything, It can't be for any other purpose. In fact, it's very much like Germany's selling submarines to Israel, which are capable of carrying nuclear-tipped warheads. Missiles. That tells the Iranians you're not going to have any deterrent. If Israel wants to attack you, there's nothing you can do, because if you do, you'll be wiped out with nuclear weapons from submarines, the German submarines that we've given to you. That's what all this stuff is about. I mean, the public rhetoric, if you think it through, just collapses on the roads very quickly. I should say, with regard to Iran, you can make a good argument that the United States is already at war with Iran. In fact, that argument was made inadvertently, wasn't their intention, by 5 leading former NATO commanders, including the former chief of staff of the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You may have seen this a couple of months ago. They produced a very aggressive document, 5 NATO commanders, saying that the U.S. must intensify extend its aggressive military posture, including nuclear weapons, and again, same comment, which have to be the cornerstone of our military posture. That's a standard line that goes through everyone. We have to extend it. No Russians anymore, nothing like that. But we have to do it because we have to target the third world. And that's been policy since 1990, official policy. We have to target the first world, and there are many threats coming from the first world. And one of the threats they mention, which they call an act of war that we can expect from the third world, is abuse of the leverage that they have for financial manipulations. Okay, that would be an act of war if they were carried out against us. Okay? Well, it happens that it's not potential, it's actual. So if they're right, we're now engaged in an act of war against Iran, and have been particularly since March 20th. On March 20th, the U.S. Treasury Department made a critically important decision, which as usual wasn't reported, but there are a couple of analytic articles about it. They decided to impose sanctions on the main Iranian national banks. Okay? Now there's a provision of the Patriot Act, a little provision hidden in there somewhere, which says that if any financial institutions anywhere violate U.S. restrictions on what some financial institution elsewhere may do, like say an Iranian bank, then they're blocked from the U.S. market and financial system. Well, nobody can accept that. That's China may not even accept it. Certainly Europe won't. So that's essentially telling Iran, thanks to the Patriot Act and the Treasury Department decision on March 20th, that we're using our financial leverage to completely isolate them from the international economy with a serious threat. It's not a minor threat. Actually, this was tried already, a kind of a trial run in the case of North Korea in September 2005. In September 2005, an agreement was reached between the United States and North Korea in the framework of the Six Power talks, in which North Korea agreed to dismantle all of its nuclear facilities, all of them, all finished. And in return, the United States was to terminate its hostility and threats against North Korea and provide certain kinds of aid. Well, a couple of days later, the Treasury Department used these instruments by blocking the any operations by the bank in Macau that North Korea uses for its international operations. Well, North Korea understood that as it was intended to be, namely an act of war, and one which undermined the agreement that had just been reached, and they reacted by a nuclear weapons test. Yeah, it's the way things work in the world. My suspicion is that was just kind of like a test run to see if these, on a small case, and all we do is, drive North Korea to produce nuclear weapons. Okay, who cares about that? But it's testing these instruments, which are agreed by the 5 NATO commanders to be acts of war. So we don't have to talk about potential abuse of leverage. We can talk about actual abuse of leverage, and Iran isn't the only case. There are many others. This is the most dangerous one. So for lots of reasons, I think we really have to look at the Iranian issue quite differently. And it is a striking case where American opinion and U.S. government policy are sharply at odds, very sharply at odds. I'll just add another piece to it. By about 3 to 1, Americans have been opposed to any threats against Iran and are in favor of diplomacy. That's a pretty big margin. These figures, 3 to 1 opposition to threats, approximately the same percentage calling for a nuclear-free weapon zone, supporting Iranian right to nuclear enrichment. These are amazing figures if you think about it, because the people who answer those questions in polls, each of them must think, I'm the only crazy person in the world who thinks this. They never heard it anywhere. They never read it anywhere. There's no candidate who could possibly say anything like that. So people, it's just coming from inside. If we had anything like a functioning democracy or a free press where issues like this could be discussed, the numbers would be far higher. I presume that's the reason why these things are never reported. In fact, the extent to which they're not reported is extremely revealing. I mentioned a little bit a serious problem in the United States, namely the lack of functioning democracy. The press knows it. These polls that I just mentioned, before 80% say the country is run by a few big interests, we're looking out for themselves, not the people. 95%, 94% to be precise, think that the government ought to pay regular attention to public opinion. The rest of them, those polls came in a batch from the leading polling agency in the country, program under national policy attitudes, the University of Maryland, the most serious polling agency. There was a batch of them that were released in one batch. There was another one in the same batch. It was about public attitudes towards Chinese repression in Tibet. Guess which one got reported? And draw the obvious conclusions from it. That's a decision at every editorial desk. We get this batch of polls, we report one of them, the one about China's repression in Tibet, not the others, the ones about us. Those we don't talk about. It's much too dangerous. It might help people to start to think, and that's really frightening. It made a lot of sense. I was involved in resistance and so on and so forth. I don't know if that's the right tactic today. I mean, it seems to me that just looking at the country, it seems to me this country ought to be an organizer's paradise. Everybody already agrees with us. I mean, what I've just been quoting, it's basically what we all think. It's even more extreme than what most of us think. And those are people's opinions. So it ought to be possible to organize people to act, which they can, of course, so they don't provide the leadership with the ability to act in violation of their strongest wishes, and in fact maybe to destroy the world. Now, whether direct action is the way to bring that about or not, I don't know. Maybe there are modes of doing it, but I suspect your judgment's probably better than mine.
Okay, thank you. We have time for like 2 more questions.
Given your views on missile defense systems as only another way to have a first strike capability, how do you respond to the claims of those who support those systems that if both sides or all sides, in some cases, were to have those systems, it would make nuclear weapons closer to being obsolete and thus make them less likely to be used?
Well, if every country in the world had a comparable missile defense system, that would be true. But that's so remote from conceivability that we can't even talk about it. I mean, the U.S. is the only country that has the capacity to develop such systems on a significant scale. The Russians do have a kind of a limited missile defense system, ABM system around Moscow. But remember, the United States spends about as much as the rest of the world combined in military expenditures, and it's technologically far more advanced. No other country has 700 bases around the world, and military forces carrying out aggression all over the world or intervening everywhere. We're just in a class by ourselves, not in other dimensions. In economic, by the economic dimension, cultural dimensions and so on, the U.S. is one among several. The world for years has been pretty much tripolar. Europe, North America, Northeast Asia, counting Japan, now South Asia. They're all roughly on a par, and in many respects, the others are more advanced in social programs. Many others, Europe's way more advanced in just financial reserves. Northeast Asia, mainly China and Japan, and the oil producers that are keeping our economy going. We borrow from them. But on the military dimension, the U.S. is just kind of off the page. So no one can possibly develop these systems. And in fact, if everyone could develop those systems, they'd eliminate them, and they would get rid of their nuclear weapons, as they're legally obliged to do. Much simpler than developing, high technology systems that giving them to everyone. Just eliminate the nuclear weapons. We can do that. And vote for a fissile missile cutoff treaty. Can also do that. So there are much simpler ways of achieving the goal than this pretty fanciful one.
Professor Chomsky, I want to ask you about the notion you presented about having limited zones of no nuclear weapons, and how that could be a path towards worldwide abolition. I'm not really familiar with the proposal, so I want to know if you could expand on it. And specifically, I could imagine a scenario in which we or some international body might try to make such a zone, say in Asia that included China or India, to rising economic powers with nuclear capabilities. And if the U.S. was not already free of nuclear weapons, why would they ever agree to that?
You're quite right. As long as some powers maintain a first strike nuclear weapons capacity, particularly the United States, but others too, others aren't going to agree. They are the examples that do exist are regions of the world, almost all in the South, in fact, in which the states have agreed not to allow any nuclear weapons in that region. Okay. So the South Pacific Treaty says we don't want any nuclear weapons here. Well, they can't get away with it for the reasons I mentioned, but they made steps towards it. And some of them were pretty interesting, like New Zealand would not accept a visit by U.S. Naval vessels which were capable of carrying nuclear weapons. And in fact, they drove them out of Auckland Harbor in a very striking event. One of the ships tried to come in under a U.S.-New Zealand treaty, and there's a lot of sailors in New Zealand, and they just mobbed the harbor and drove the ship out. It's pretty exciting. But the U.S. was furious about it, but they did it. But there's a limit to what they can do, because they can't get us out of the Federated States of Palau and so on. The same with Deigo Garcia. The African countries just said, we don't want nuclear weapons, so get them out of here. But if the U.S. and Britain decide to kick out the population of Deigo Garcia and use it as a military base, what are they going to do with that? And the same with the nuclear weapons-free zone from the Arctic to the Baltic that Gorbachev proposed. That would have been valuable. Russia and the United States would still have nuclear weapons, but at least they wouldn't be sort of bristling at each other. But Clinton wouldn't allow it. So these are steps, partial steps, and you're quite right that they leave a lot to be desired. And the crucial thing that they lead to be desired is that the nuclear states will take seriously their legal obligation to take good faith efforts to eliminate nuclear weapons. Another thing which incidentally is supported by about 80% of the American population. And by now it's even supported by some pretty prestigious people. So people like George Shultz and Henry Kissinger and others have come out in favor of this, not because they're nice guys, but they just would like to see the world survive for another generation or two.
All right, so we're going to take one more question. I'm sorry. Go for it.
The optimist.
I love
the justification for the war in Afghanistan and Iraq is safe to assume that it was 9/11. Yet 30% of the victims' family members in the 9/11 Commission report, only 30% of their questions were answered. And Thomas Keane and Lee Hamilton, the chair and co-chair of the 9/11 Commission report, stated in a New York Times op-ed piece that they were stonewalled by the CIA. Things like the World Trade 7, a building that was 47 stories that fell at free fall speed, yet it was not hit by a plane, and there were reports of a countdown, and BBC and CNN reporting the building having been collapsed before it actually had collapsed. Has anybody, just a show of hands, I'll be real quick. Does anybody know about World Trade 7? Do they think it was a controlled demolition, yes or no? Yes, it was a controlled demolition. Really? Wow. Look up loose change. Google loose change. Here you go. Loose change final cut. Check it out.
Right on.
That's fine. I'll be very brief about this. There is a large movement called itself the Truth Movement, which argues that 9/11 was somehow some kind of inside job. There are two kinds of evidence presented. One kind is physical evidence, like how did Building 7 collapse? Now, I don't have the expertise in physics of the person who just spoke, so I don't know how Building 7 collapsed. But I do know that you can't pick up that expertise by a couple hours on the internet. That's why they have graduate departments of mechanical engineering and so on in places like MIT. It's hard work. But if anyone thinks they have evidence for that, there's a way to proceed. The way to proceed is submit a paper to a scientific or engineering journal so that others can evaluate it. So, for example, when scientists say come out in favor of intelligent design and give complicated stories about how bacteria couldn't have evolved and so on, I don't have the expertise to judge it. But I take them seriously because they take themselves seriously. They submit papers to scientific journals. They write books for scientific audience. Which are then evaluated. There's debate and discussion about whether bacteria really can develop this way and so on. And outsiders can look at it and make their own judgment. Nobody has the special knowledge of every branch of science, or even a few, that enable them to make judgments like that. That's why there are journals like Science and Nature and others, so that other scientists can have a look and see if it makes sense. Well, to my knowledge, there hasn't been a single submission even, to any reputable science journal. I mean, there are submissions to the Journal of 9/11 Studies, but that's about as convincing as submissions to the Journal of, Intelligent Design Studies. Of course, nobody takes it seriously. The other kind of evidence is circumstantial evidence. Like, for example, the CNN reports, that were not comparable to something else. The problem with that is you take any event in history that you like, pick an arbitrary event, take a close look at it, you're going to find a ton of apparent evidence that doesn't make any sense. Things that contradict each other, things that seem to contradict laws of nature, and so on. That's why scientists do experiments. That's why you don't just take videotapes of things happening in the world and see if you can figure out something from it. You won't. It's just too much of a mess. So you do controlled experiments. If I wanted, I could develop a theory, I'll do it right now, proving that George Bush wants to murder everyone in the United States. Actually, it's a triviality. A couple of months ago, a bomber flew across the United States armed with nuclear weapons. I mean, that violates every conceivable high-level security condition you can imagine, I mean, they can't think of anything more dangerous, but it happened. Because, as usual, everything got screwed up. But now I'll give you my theory. The reason is Bush wants to murder everyone in the United States, so he made sure that the planes didn't scramble and, all the other stuff, and this bomber was able to fly across the United States with nuclear weapons. Well, how come they didn't go off? Oh, that's easy. Everyone knows that the United States is controlled by Israel. And Mossad figured out, and in fact you can see Israelis dancing on the roof and so on. So Mossad figured out that if the bombs went off, they'd kill Jews. And of course they have moles inside the system, so they defuse the weapons. Okay. Well, no, you're right. Obviously you laugh. But the point is you can make up a theory like that about anything. And unless some really serious evidence comes along, it's not going to be credible. And that's just the beginning of it. I mean, let's assume it's true. Suppose the Bush administration somehow organized the World Trade Center bombing. I mean, then if that's true, they're total lunatics. I mean, the purpose was supposed to be...
once before, in 93, wasn't it? In 93?
There was a bombing in 93 which almost worked. It almost worked, and they caught the people who did it. One of them, in fact, had been let into the country by the CIA, and they didn't do anything about it afterwards. Yeah, so there was a bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993, which, if it had been planned a little better, it might have killed thousands of people, tens of thousands. But okay, but the striking thing about this case, the 9/11 case, is let's say they orchestrated it. Why would they pick Saudis to be the bombers, the hijackers? I mean, they're supposed to be planning an attack on Iraq, right? And they want to build up popular support for an attack on Iraq. Well, obviously pick Iraqis, and not Saudis. Therefore, prejudice, first of all, undermining your own goal, because they're not Iraqis. And secondly, prejudicing your relations with your most valuable ally. You remember they had to suddenly fly all sorts of Saudi businessmen out of the country, violating airspace restrictions because it was too embarrassing. I mean, that's just sheer insanity. So if they did it, if they're insane, what's the point of discussing any theory? But I just don't think anything like this hangs together. If anybody can put together a case, fine. But as far as I can see, you can't put together a better case than the one I just mentioned about Bush trying to murder everyone in the country. Try it and see. There's an interesting question. There's some very interesting aspects of this. I mean, I'm surprised too that so few people raised their hands, because if you look at polls, at least the ones I've seen, I think maybe a third of the people in the country believe there's something to this, which is quite striking. What that means is, maybe a third, whatever the number is, a third of the people in the country think that George Bush is a mass murderer who wants to murder Americans, but I can't do anything about it. I mean, like, has anybody tried to do anything about it? You know? Okay, so we're governed by a bunch of mass murderers that want to kill us all. Okay, now I'll go bowling or something. That's what, I mean, that's another, whatever the truth or falsehood about all this is, it's a remarkable comment on American democracy. You know, that people simply feel so detached from affairs of state that they can't do anything, even if they think the government is trying to murder them. You know, that's worth thinking about.
So I'm going to let you ask your question, but anybody that doesn't get their book signed, I want them to personally blame whoever this kid is.
I promise it's going to be a really easy to answer question, Professor. I have the audacity of hope to believe that with Barack Obama as president, we will be nuclearly disarmed within the next 9 years. But my question to the Professor Chomsky would be, how many years after that would China disarm? Also, I'd like to invite everyone to the first TAMS meeting on Monday. It's Tufts against machetes. Many people might not know that more than 10 times as many people have been killed in recent years by machetes as compared to nuclear bombs. Monday, 6 p.m., Anderson 208, Tufts against machetes first meeting. Thank you. And back to China.
Well, I'll give you a more pertinent fact. Two leading hawkish military experts writing in Foreign Affairs pointed out that many more people have been killed by U.S. sanctions than have been killed by all the weapons of mass destruction in history. Well, that's something we might think about. Americans, incidentally, are opposed to sanctions by large majorities against Cuba and everyone else. As far as machetes are concerned, you're right. I mean, in fact, small arms, that's what kills all sorts of people. In fact, right here, you know, just read recently that a 3-year-old girl picked up a handgun somewhere and killed herself or shot somebody. It was in the Boston Globe a couple of days ago. Happens all the time. And in countries which are, you know, falling apart, like, say, Eastern Congo, small arms are killing huge numbers of people. There's probably 4 million people or more in the Eastern Congo. We're all involved in that. First of all, because the U.S. is one of the biggest, maybe the biggest arms seller in the world, small arms seller, and because U.S. corporations and all Western corporations and the Chinese too, all have their hands in there trying to get the resources of the countries. They don't care how many people kill each other, as long as they're pulling out the resources. So sure, in fact, we're even more deeply involved. I mean, the Congo should be one of the richest countries in the world. How come it isn't? Well, it had hope, you know. After decolonization, it had hope. They had a very impressive leader, Patrice Lumumba, and they were beginning to move towards overcoming the hideous effects of colonization, which were murders. I won't go through it. So they were beginning to do it. But something happened to Lumumba. He was assassinated, and the U.S. helped with that. And in fact, leader after leader was assassinated throughout these countries, and we had a lot to do with it. So yeah, they're killing each other with machetes. So sure, it's important. A lot that we can do about it. It's not a small thing, and we should do something about it.
This is KPFK Los Angeles, 90.7 FM, heard in Santa Barbara at 98.7 FM, and on the web at kpfk.org. We've been listening to Noam Chomsky on youth and securing a nuclear-free future, thinking outside the bomb.